My name is Oralia Montenegro, and for 8 years, my family treated me like their personal embarrassment. While my younger brother Dante lived like their golden child, I was dismissed as the retail girl who couldn't amount to anything. But last month, when my father's company faced bankruptcy and needed an emergency CFO, they discovered something that left them completely speechless. What happened next didn't just save their business. It revealed a secret that made my mother actually apologize for the first time in my adult life. Before I tell you how I went from being the family disappointment to holding their financial future in my hands, please take a moment to like and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy stories about proving doubters wrong. I'd love to know where you're watching from and what inspired you to never give up on your dreams. Drop a comment below. I read every single one. Now, let me take you back to that December evening when everything changed. I was in my downtown apartment, reviewing quarterly reports for my consulting clients when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Dad, and my stomach immediately tightened. He never called unless something was seriously wrong. Oralia, we need to talk. His voice was strained, nothing like the dismissive tone he usually used with me. Can you come to the house tomorrow? It's about the business. I looked at my laptop screen, where financial projections for 3 different companies glowed in neat rows. If only he knew what I'd been doing for the past 5 years. What's wrong with the business, Dad? Just, can you come, please? The word please from my father was so rare, I almost dropped the phone. For a man who'd spent years telling people I was just working retail until I figured things out, begging wasn't in his vocabulary. I closed my laptop and walked to my home office, the one my family had never seen because they'd never bothered to visit my apartment. 3 monitors displayed real-time market data, financial software I'd mastered during countless late nights, and client portfolios worth millions. On the wall hung my CPA certificate, my master's in finance from Wharton, and a photo of me shaking hands with the CEO of Goldman Sachs after closing a major restructuring deal. My phone buzzed with a text from my younger brother Dante. Dad's freaking out about something with Montenegro Industries. Maybe your retail experience can help us organize the stockroom. Even in crisis, he couldn't resist a jab. I set the phone aside and pulled up Montenegro Industries' public financial statements. What I found made my blood run cold. The company my grandfather built, the one that employed 2,000 people, was hemorrhaging money. Poor cash flow management, over-leveraged debt, and what looked suspiciously like embezzlement. They needed more than a new stockroom organization, they needed a miracle. The irony wasn't lost on me as I drove to my childhood home the next evening. For 8 years, they'd mocked my little retail job, never asking what I did with my time, my money, or my apparent ability to afford a luxury apartment in the city's financial district. They'd constructed their own narrative. Oralia works at department stores because she's not smart enough for anything else. The truth was more complex. I'd started in retail at 16, working at Nordstrom to pay for community college. But while my family saw only the uniform and name tag, I was studying every aspect of business operations. Inventory management, supply chain logistics, customer behavior analytics, profit margins. By 18, I was analyzing store performance and suggesting improvements that increased our location's revenue by 30%. The store manager, Janet, noticed my aptitude for numbers. Have you considered finance? She'd asked one day, watching me reconcile discrepancies in our daily reports. You have a natural talent for seeing patterns others miss. That conversation changed my life. I enrolled in night classes for accounting while working full-time, then business courses. Then I tested out of prerequisites and applied to Wharton's executive program. I paid for everything myself, studying until 3 a.m. after closing shifts, sleeping 4 hours, then doing it again. When I graduated with my master's at 24, I didn't tell my family. They'd made it clear they weren't interested in my achievements. At my graduation ceremony, I sat alone in the audience of proud families, but I wasn't bitter. I was focused. I started consulting part-time while still working retail, helping small businesses with their books. Then medium-sized companies. Then I landed my first major client, a struggling restaurant chain that needed complete financial restructuring. I turned them around in 18 months, and suddenly everyone wanted to know who this Oralia Montenegro was. The retail job became my cover. When family asked what I did for work, I'd say, still at the store. and they'd nod with that familiar mixture of pity and condescension. What I didn't mention was that I was now the principal consultant at Montenegro Financial Solutions, with clients across 3 states and a team of 12 analysts working under me. My parents' house looked exactly the same as I remembered: imposing, cold, designed to impress rather than welcome. I parked next to Dante's new BMW, the one our parents had bought him for landing an entry-level marketing job at their company. The same parents who'd told me to be realistic about my limitations when I'd mentioned wanting to study business. Inside, the family was gathered in the formal living room like mourners at a wake. My mother, Victoria, sat rigidly in her usual chair, her face a mask of barely controlled panic. My father, Roberto, paced by the windows, running his hands through his graying hair. Dante lounged on the sofa, but his usual smugness was replaced by genuine worry. "Oralia," my mother said without getting up, "thank you for coming." No hug, no warmth, just the same distant politeness she'd shown me since I'd refused to follow their prescribed path for my life. A path that apparently involved marriage to their friend's son and abandoning any career ambitions that might overshadow Dante's meteoric rise in the family business. "What's going on?" I asked, taking a seat across from them. "Dad said it was about Montenegro Industries." Roberto stopped pacing. "We're in trouble, serious trouble. The bank is calling in our loans, we've got cash flow problems, and—" He paused, looking older than his 58 years. "There might be some irregularities in our financial reporting." Irregularities, corporate speak for someone's been stealing and we're about to get audited. "How bad is it?" I kept my voice neutral, professional. "Bad enough that we need to hire a CFO immediately," Dante said. "Dad's been handling the finances himself, but it's gotten too complex. We need someone with real experience." I almost laughed. The same family that had spent years telling me I wasn't smart enough for real business was now admitting they needed professional financial help. "We've reached out to several executive search firms," my mother added, "but good CFOs don't grow on trees, and with our situation, it's difficult to attract top talent." "What's your timeline?" I asked. 30 days, Roberto said grimly. "If we don't have new leadership and a restructuring plan in place, the bank will foreclose. 2,000 jobs, Oralia, gone." I thought about the employees I'd never met, the families depending on paychecks from a company my grandfather had built with his bare hands. Then I thought about my own client roster, the carefully built reputation I'd spent years developing. "Can I see your financial statements?" The question slipped out before I could stop myself. They exchanged glances. "Why?" Dante asked with his usual edge of condescension. "I mean, no offense, but you work retail. This is pretty complex stuff." There it was, 8 years of dismissal, of being treated like I was too stupid to understand real business, crystallized in one casual insult. I pulled out my phone and showed them a photo from last month. Me presenting to the board of directors at Peterson Holdings, a $500 million manufacturing company I'd just saved from bankruptcy. The room went completely silent. That's the Peterson board," Roberto said slowly. "I know 3 of those men personally there. Brilliant executives who hired me to restructure their company's debt and implement new cash flow management systems." I finished calmly. "The turnaround was successful enough that I've been invited to speak at the National CFO Conference next month." Victoria's mouth actually fell open. "You, what?" I opened my laptop and pulled up my company website. Montenegro Financial Solutions. I've been running it for 5 years. We specialize in corporate restructuring, debt management, and financial optimization for mid to large cap companies. The silence stretched so long, I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. "You've been a consultant this whole time?" Dante's voice cracked slightly. "I've been a senior financial consultant while working retail part-time as cover," I corrected. It seemed easier than constantly defending my career choices to people who'd already decided I was a failure. Roberto sank into his chair. "The retail job pays for my health insurance and gives me a flexible schedule for client meetings. It's also where I learned inventory management, supply chain optimization, and customer behavior analytics skills that have saved my clients millions in operational costs. My mother was staring at me like I was a stranger. Why didn't you tell us? The question hung in the air like an accusation. Why didn't I tell the people who'd spent years making it clear they thought I was incompetent? Why didn't I share my success with the family that celebrated Dante's every minor achievement while treating my presence like an obligation? When exactly should I have told you? I asked quietly. During Christmas dinner when you introduced me to your friends as still figuring things out? Or maybe during Dante's promotion party when you told everyone I was between real jobs? Victoria had the grace to look ashamed. You never asked about my life, I continued. Not once in 5 years did anyone in this room ask what I do all day, how I afford my apartment, or why I travel so much for retail work. You constructed your own story about who I was and never bothered to check if it was true. Roberto cleared his throat. Would you be willing to look at our books unofficially? I almost said no, almost walked out and let them figure out their crisis alone. But then I thought about my grandfather, who'd built Montenegro Industries from nothing. I thought about the employees who didn't deserve to lose their jobs because of poor management. I'll need complete access to your financial records, banking information, and 3 years of tax returns. Done, Roberto said immediately. And I'll need to know who's been managing your accounts receivable, because from what I can see in your public filings, someone's been either incompetent or criminal. Dante shifted uncomfortably. I've been handling collections. Of course he had. The golden child who'd been handed a vice president title at 26, without any actual qualifications, had been trusted with the company's cash flow. We'll discuss that later, I said diplomatically. Right now, I need to understand the full scope of the problem. 2 hours later, I sat in my childhood home study, surrounded by financial documents that painted a picture of systematic mismanagement. Dante had been approving credit extensions for friends, writing off bad debts without proper documentation, and somehow losing nearly $300,000 in receivables over 18 months. But the real problem was deeper. Roberto, brilliant at manufacturing and terrible at finance, had been making expansion decisions based on optimism rather than cash flow projections. They'd borrowed heavily to fund new equipment and facilities without stress testing their debt service capabilities. The company wasn't just in trouble, it was on life support. I worked until dawn, building financial models and running scenarios. By morning, I had a preliminary restructuring plan that could save Montenegro Industries, but it would require brutal cuts and complete financial discipline. I also had something else, leverage. When my family gathered for breakfast, a meal I hadn't shared with them in 3 years, I was ready. The good news, I began, is that the company can be saved. The bad news is that it requires immediate, drastic action. I laid out my findings. $2.3 million in missing or poorly managed receivables, $800,000 in unnecessary operational costs, and debt service payments that were consuming 43% of monthly revenue. How do you fix it? Victoria asked, her business degree from 20 years ago finally showing. Complete financial restructuring, debt renegotiation, operational efficiency improvements, and, I looked directly at Dante, new management in accounts receivable. You want to fire me? Dante's voice rose. I want to save the company. If that means restructuring personnel responsibilities, yes. Roberto was studying my projections. This is incredibly thorough. How long did it take you to put this together? 6 hours, it's what I do. The consulting fee for this level of work, he began, would normally be $50,000 for the analysis and $200,000 for implementation, I finished. But since it's family, I'll do it for free, with conditions. Here it comes, I thought. The moment when I stop being the family disappointment and start being the person who holds their future in her hands. First, I need to be hired as interim CFO with complete authority over financial decisions. Second, all major expenditures over $10,000 require my approval. Third, Dante moves to marketing full-time and stays out of financial operations. You want to be CFO? Victoria couldn't hide her shock. Mother, I've been functioning as CFO for companies larger than Montenegro Industries for 3 years. I'm not asking for the job, I'm offering to take it. Roberto was quiet for a long time, studying the restructuring plan. When he looked up, something had changed in his eyes. For the first time in my adult life, he was looking at me with respect. What would you need from us? Trust, complete transparency, and an acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, you've underestimated your daughter for the past 8 years. The room fell silent again, but this time it felt different. Not the silence of shock, but the silence of recognition. Victoria spoke first. We owe you an apology. You owe me more than that, I said gently. You owe me the chance to save our family's legacy, but you also owe yourselves the chance to see who I really am. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, or had your capabilities dismissed because of their preconceptions, you understand why what happened next meant everything to me. Drop a comment below. Have you ever had to prove your worth to people who should have believed in you from the start? I read every single one. The transformation didn't happen overnight. For the first month as Montenegro Industries CFO, I worked 16-hour days, restructuring debt, renegotiating contracts, and implementing financial controls that should have been in place years ago. But the hardest part wasn't the numbers, it was the family dynamics. Dante struggled with his reduced role, oscillating between sullen resentment and grudging admiration as the company's financial health improved weekly. Roberto, humbled by his near-catastrophic mismanagement, threw himself into learning from me with the intensity he'd once reserved for manufacturing processes. And my mother surprised me most of all. I need to tell you something, Victoria said one evening as I worked late in the CFO office, the same office where I'd once begged my father to let me intern during high school. He'd told me it was too complicated for someone my age. I knew you were smart, she continued. I knew you were capable, but I was terrified you'd outshine Dante, and I thought protecting him meant diminishing you. Why? I asked, not looking up from the cash flow projections that would determine whether we could make payroll next month. Because he's my son, and you're? She paused, struggling with words that had been 29 years in the making. You're extraordinary, and I didn't know how to be proud of extraordinary without making everyone else feel ordinary. I finally looked up. My mother was crying, something I'd seen perhaps 3 times in my entire life. So you decided to pretend I wasn't extraordinary at all. I decided to pretend you were safe, average, protected from expectations. She wiped her eyes. I realize now how cruel that was. 3 months into my tenure as CFO, Montenegro Industries was not only stable but profitable. We'd renegotiated our debt, streamlined operations, and implemented financial tracking systems that gave us real-time visibility into every aspect of the business. More importantly, I'd uncovered the source of our cash flow problems. Dante hadn't been malicious, just incompetent. His missing receivables were mostly accounts he'd been too embarrassed to pursue aggressively, and his bad debt write-offs were legitimate but poorly documented. I'm sorry, he said one afternoon, standing in my office doorway like a guilty child. I was in over my head, but I was too proud to ask for help. Pride is expensive, I replied, not unkindly. But it's not irreversible. You're actually quite good at client relationships, you just shouldn't be managing their money. He laughed for the first time in months. Is this what it feels like to have a competent big sister? I wouldn't know. I've never had siblings who acknowledged my competence before. The real validation came 4 months later, when the board of directors, including members who'd known me since childhood as Roberto's retail daughter, voted unanimously to remove the interim from my CFO title. Oralia, said board member Harrison Cole, who'd patted my head at company picnics when I was 10, in 40 years of business, I've never seen a more impressive turnaround. Your work hasn't just saved this company, it's positioned us for growth. After the meeting, Roberto pulled me aside. I have something for you, he said, handing me a small wooden box. Inside was my grandfather's signet ring, the one I'd always admired as a child. He always said this should go to the family member who understood what he built. I think we know who that is. But the moment that changed everything between us came 6 months later, at the annual company holiday party. For years, these parties had been exercises in awkwardness for me. I'd attend out of obligation, listen to Roberto praise Dante's promising marketing initiatives, and leave early to avoid the inevitable conversations about my retail career. This year was different. Ladies and gentlemen, Roberto announced to the crowd of employees, clients, and board members, I want to tell you about the person who saved Montenegro Industries. My stomach clenched. I hated being the center of attention, especially in front of people who'd known me as the family disappointment. 8 months ago, our company was facing bankruptcy. We needed a CFO desperately, and we thought we'd have to search for months to find someone qualified. He paused, looking directly at me. What we found was that the most qualified person had been right under our noses for years. He walked over to where I stood, frozen with embarrassment and pride. My daughter Oralia didn't just save our company with her financial expertise. She taught us something more valuable. That competence doesn't announce itself, and brilliance doesn't always come with the credentials we expect. The applause started slowly, then built to something that felt like thunder. For years, we introduced Oralia as our daughter who works in retail. Tonight, I want to introduce her correctly. Roberto's voice carried across the silent room. This is Oralia Montenegro, Chief Financial Officer of Montenegro Industries, Principal Consultant at Montenegro Financial Solutions, and the smartest person in our family. Later that evening, as employees and clients approached me with congratulations and business cards, Victoria appeared at my elbow. I have a confession, she said quietly. I Googled you last week. Montenegro Financial Solutions has quite the reputation. The Peterson turnaround made industry news. You never asked about my work, I replied, accepting another handshake from a supplier who'd been doing business with us for decades. I was afraid to ask about your work, she corrected. I was afraid you'd tell me you were successful, and then I'd have to admit I'd been wrong about you for years. She paused, watching as the mayor of our city introduced himself and mentioned he'd heard about my consulting work. I'd rather have an extraordinary daughter I underestimated than an ordinary daughter I overprotected, Victoria said finally. I'm sorry it took me so long to realize that. The evening's surprises weren't over. As the party wound down, Harrison Cole approached me with a proposal that would change everything again. Oralia, I sit on several boards around the state. Word is getting out about your work here and about Montenegro Financial Solutions. How would you feel about expanding your consulting practice? He handed me a business card. Wellington Industries. They're a $2 billion conglomerate facing the same problems Montenegro had, but on a much larger scale. They've asked me to recommend a CFO for their restructuring. The position comes with equity participation and a 7-figure compensation package. I looked at the card, then across the room at my father, who was deep in conversation with our head of manufacturing about expansion plans I'd approved that morning. It's a tremendous opportunity, Harrison continued, though I understand if you're committed to staying with the family business. For the first time in 8 years, my family wasn't trying to hold me back. They weren't dismissing my ambitions or telling me to be realistic about my limitations. They were celebrating my success. But more importantly, I was finally free to choose my path without their approval or disapproval defining my worth. Tell Wellington Industries I'm interested, I said, surprising myself, but I'll need to train my replacement here first. Montenegro Industries deserves continuity. Harrison smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. Professional excellence and family loyalty, exactly what Wellington needs. As I drove home that night, I thought about the 8 years I'd spent proving myself to people who'd already decided I was a failure. I thought about the late nights studying while my family slept, the client victories I'd celebrated alone, the success I'd built in secret. But mostly, I thought about the little girl who'd sat in her father's office, asking if she could help with the business someday, only to be told it was too complicated for someone like her. That little girl had become the CFO who saved the family company. Not despite their doubt, but because of what their doubt had taught her about depending on herself. 6 months later, I accepted the position at Wellington Industries. The day I announced my transition from Montenegro's CFO to consultant, Roberto walked into my office with tears in his eyes. "I'm proud of you," he said simply. "I should have said that years ago, but I'm saying it now." Thank you, Dad." "Can I ask you something?" He sat down across from my desk, the same desk where he'd once told me business was too complex for someone my age. "Why didn't you give up on us, after everything we put you through?" I thought about it for a moment, looking out the window at the manufacturing floor, where my grandfather had started with nothing but determination and vision. "Because giving up on you would have meant giving up on myself," I said finally. "And I learned a long time ago that I'm worth more than other people's low expectations." The transition to Wellington Industries wasn't without its challenges. On my first day as CFO of a $2 billion conglomerate, I walked into a boardroom filled with executives who'd heard about the retail worker turned financial genius. But skepticism lingered in their eyes. They wanted to see if the Montenegro turnaround was a fluke or if I could handle the big leagues. Within 6 months, I'd proven it wasn't luck. Wellington's financial restructuring under my leadership resulted in a 34% increase in operational efficiency and $180 million in cost savings. The retail experience they'd initially questioned became my secret weapon. I understood supply chain management, inventory optimization, and customer behavior patterns at a granular level that most CFOs learned only from spreadsheets. The industry took notice. Forbes featured me in their Finance Innovators Under 40 issue, with a photo of me in Wellington's executive boardroom, a far cry from the family dinner table, where I'd once been introduced as still figuring things out. The article's headline read, "From Sales Floor to C-Suite, How Orlia Montenegro Redefined Executive Leadership." But the moment that truly validated everything I'd endured came during Wellington's annual shareholders meeting. As I presented our financial turnaround to 500 investors, board members, and industry leaders, I spotted familiar faces in the audience. My entire family had flown in to hear me speak. Roberto sat in the third row, Victoria beside him, both wearing expressions of pride so intense it was almost painful to witness. Even Dante was there, filming my presentation on his phone like the proud brother he'd never been before. After my presentation, which received a standing ovation, the questions from shareholders were sharp, technical, demanding. For 30 minutes, I fielded inquiries about derivative strategies, debt restructuring methodologies, and market volatility hedging. Every answer was precise, confident, backed by years of experience they were only now learning I possessed. "Ms. Montenegro," asked one prominent investor, "your background includes extensive retail operations experience. How did that translate to corporate finance?" I looked directly at my family as I answered. "Retail taught me that every financial decision impacts real people. When you're managing inventory, you're not just moving numbers on a spreadsheet, you're ensuring customers find what they need and employees keep their jobs. That perspective makes you a more responsible steward of corporate resources." The investor nodded approvingly. "And your consulting work before Wellington?" "I spent 5 years helping companies avoid the kind of crisis that nearly destroyed my family's business," I replied. "When you've seen how poor financial management can threaten generations of work, you develop an appreciation for sustainable growth over flashy profits." After the meeting, as shareholders and board members approached me with congratulations and business cards, my family waited patiently in the back of the room. When the crowd finally thinned, Roberto walked up to me with tears in his eyes. "Orlia, I need to say something I should have said years ago." His voice was thick with emotion. "I was wrong about you. Not just wrong, I was blind, and my blindness almost cost our family everything." Victoria stepped forward, her usual composed demeanor cracked with genuine remorse. "We didn't just underestimate you, honey. We actively discouraged you from becoming who you were meant to be. I think we were threatened by your potential." "Threatened?" I asked. "You were always the smartest one in the room," Dante said quietly. "Even as kids, you understood things the rest of us couldn't grasp. But instead of celebrating that, we made you feel like being smart was wrong." I thought about all the times I'd dumbed down my insights at family dinners, all the business courses I'd taken in secret, all the success I'd hidden to avoid making them uncomfortable. The worst part Roberto continued, is that you succeeded despite us, not because of us. You became extraordinary while we were actively trying to convince you to be ordinary. A shareholder approached, interrupting our moment, but the conversation had shifted something fundamental between us. For the first time in my adult life, my family saw me clearly. That evening, at dinner in Manhattan's financial district, a neighborhood they'd never imagined me belonging to, Victoria asked the question I'd been waiting 29 years to hear. Tell us about your work, Aurelia, really tell us. We want to understand what we missed. So I did. I told them about the late nights studying financial modeling, while they thought I was just tired from retail shifts. I described the first client who trusted me with their company's future, and how terrifying and exhilarating it was to realize I could actually save businesses from collapse. I explained how retail had taught me to read market trends, understand consumer behavior, and manage complex logistics, skills that translated directly to corporate strategy. I shared stories of the companies I'd saved, the jobs I'd preserved, the families whose livelihoods depended on my ability to turn numbers into solutions. The Peterson Holdings turnaround, I said, pulling up photos on my phone, required restructuring $400 million in debt while maintaining operations across 12 states. The retail experience you all mocked taught me how to optimize supply chains and reduce operational costs by 40%. Dante shook his head in amazement, and we thought you were just folding clothes. I was folding clothes, I said with a smile, but I was also analyzing why certain items sold better in specific locations, tracking seasonal demand patterns, and learning how inventory management impacts cash flow. Every skill I needed for corporate finance, I learned on that sales floor. Roberto raised his wine glass. To Aurelia Montenegro, who taught us that extraordinary doesn't always look like what we expect. To second chances, Victoria added, and the daughter who gave us one we didn't deserve. As we toasted, I realized this wasn't just about proving them wrong. It was about giving them the opportunity to know who I really was, and discovering that, despite everything, they were capable of growth too. The success continued to build. Wellington Industries' stock price rose 28% in my first year as CFO. I was invited to join the boards of 3 major corporations and speak at financial conferences across the country. Harvard Business School asked me to guest lecture on retail to finance career transitions. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. The National Retail Federation honored me with their Excellence in Leadership Award, acknowledging that my retail background hadn't been a detour from my finance career, it had been the foundation of it. In my acceptance speech, I looked out at an audience of retail executives, finance professionals, and business students, and said something I wish I could have told my younger self. Never let anyone convince you that where you start determines where you finish. Never apologize for taking an unconventional path to your dreams. And never, ever let other people's limited vision become your reality. The standing ovation lasted 3 full minutes. Today, Montenegro Industries continues to thrive under the systems I implemented. Dante has become a genuinely talented marketing executive, and our quarterly family dinners now include actual conversations about business strategy. Victoria volunteers with women's entrepreneurship programs, helping other mothers recognize their daughters' potential. 3 years later, Montenegro Industries is thriving under the CFO I trained to replace me. Dante has found his calling in marketing and client relations. Victoria serves on 2 nonprofit boards and frequently mentions her brilliant CFO daughter to anyone who will listen. And me, I'm the Chief Financial Officer of Wellington Industries, where I oversee a financial team of 47 people and manage budgets that would have seemed impossible when I was folding sweaters at Nordstrom and dreaming of something bigger. But the best part isn't the salary or the recognition, or even the family pride I'd waited years to see. The best part is knowing that I never needed their permission to be extraordinary. I just needed to stop waiting for it. Your value isn't determined by other people's ability to recognize it. Your worth isn't diminished by their failure to see it. And your success doesn't require anyone's approval but your own. Remember that when people tell you to be realistic about your limitations. Remember that when they dismiss your dreams as too ambitious for someone like you. Remember that when they can't see past their own narrow vision of who you're supposed to be. Thank you for joining me on this journey from retail worker to CFO. If my story resonated with you, I'd love to hear about a time when you had to prove your worth to people who should have believed in you from the start. Drop a comment below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And if you believe everyone deserves respect regardless of their current position, please share this video with someone who needs to remember their own worth. Subscribe for more stories about people who refused to stay small, no matter who tried to keep them there. Until next time, this is Oralia reminding you that extraordinary doesn't need permission to exist. Remember, know your worth, then add interest.